They had known peace for 2,000 years. Their world was green and beautiful, covered in vast farms and gentle cities where no one carried weapons. They had evolved from prey animals long ago, and fighting was not in their nature. They had survived by hiding, by running, by hoping that predators would lose interest. This strategy had worked on there. It would not work against the High Coordinator stood in her council chamber and watched the screens with growing horror. The warships had appeared without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in perfect attack formation. The defense fleet, small and poorly trained, had tried to respond. They lasted 11 minutes. Now burning wreckage drifted in orbit while landing ships descended through the clouds like metal rain. "How many ships?" asked. Her voice was steady, but her four-fingered hands trembled at her sides. 47 warships, her aide replied. Ground forces estimated at 60,000 soldiers. Closed her large dark eyes. They had no army. They had a small security force meant to handle minor disputes and natural disasters. Against 60,000 warriors, they might as well have nothing at all. "The commander is broadcasting a message," another aide said. "He demands complete surrender. All resources are to be turned over to the Dominion. Any resistance will result in the destruction of population centers." The council members looked at each other with wide, terrified eyes. Some were already weeping. Others sat frozen in their chairs, unable to process what was happening. For 2,000 years, the Confederation had maintained strict neutrality. They traded with everyone and threatened no one. They had believed this would protect them. They had been wrong. "We must surrender," one council member said. "We have no choice. Perhaps they will show mercy." Knew better. She had studied They were reptilian predators who respected only strength. Mercy was not a concept they understood. Surrender would mean slavery at best, extinction at worst. "There is another option," said quietly. The council turned to her. 40 years ago, a new species joined the galactic community. They came from a small planet on the edge of known space, a world called Earth. "The humans," a council member made a sound of disgust. "They are barbarians. Their history is nothing but war and violence. They fight among themselves constantly." "Yes," agreed. "They are violent, they are aggressive. They have spent their entire existence fighting and killing. They are everything we are not." She walked to her console and activated an old emergency beacon that had been installed decades ago, back when Earth first made contact with galactic civilization. The humans had offered these beacons to any species that wanted them, promising to respond if called. Most species had refused. They had accepted one out of politeness, never intending to use it. "What are you doing?" the council member demanded. "I am calling for help from the only species in this galaxy that might actually know how to fight." The beacon sent its signal into the void. Attached to it was a simple message that had composed in the human language called English. It said, "We are dying. Please help us." On Earth, 12 days later, Admiral Lucy Grant sat in her office at the United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva. She was 53 years old with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. She had commanded ships in 3 different conflicts and lost friends in all of them. When the communication officer brought her the decoded transmission, she read it twice before speaking. "Get me everything we have on the system," she said, "and schedule an emergency session with the Security Council." The data came quickly. Prime was located in a region of space controlled by the Confederation, a loose alliance of 3 herbivore species who had never developed military capability. The attacking force belonged to the Dominion, a reptilian empire that had been expanding aggressively for the past century. They were dangerous. Their warriors were fast, strong, and completely without fear. They had conquered 11 worlds in the past 50 years. The Security Council meeting was tense. Representatives from 30 nations argued for 3 hours. Some wanted to help. Others pointed out that Earth had no treaty with the no obligation to risk human lives for aliens who had always looked down on humanity as primitive newcomers. "They outnumber any force we could send," the Russian representative said. "This is suicide." "Maybe," Admiral Grant replied, "but someone is asking for our help. They are dying while we sit here and debate." "Why should we care about aliens?" another representative asked. Grant looked at him for a long moment. "Because if we do not care about others, then we are exactly what the galaxy believes us to be: animals, monsters. If we turn away from people who need us, we prove them right." The vote was close, 17 in favor, 13 against. The motion passed. Admiral Grant returned to her command center and began issuing orders. The 7th Expeditionary Fleet would deploy immediately. 8 warships, including the carrier Valor, carrying 1,200 Marines. It was not enough. It might never be enough. But it was what they had. Captain Daniel Cole received his orders while running a training exercise in the Pacific. He was 38 years old, built like a boxer, with a calm, steady voice that never rose even in the worst situations. He had served in 3 deployments and earned medals he never wore. When he read the mission briefing, he gathered his officers and spoke plainly. "We are going to Prime. The locals are being slaughtered by Our job is to get them out." "How many civilians?" Sergeant Maya Torres asked. "Unknown, could be millions." Torres nodded slowly. She was 29, small but fierce, with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She had grown up in a rough neighborhood in Chicago and joined the Marines to escape. Now she led a squad of soldiers who would follow her into hell if she asked. "Rules of engagement," she asked. "Protect the civilians. Kill anything that tries to stop us." The fleet departed Earth orbit 6 hours later. The journey would take 18 days at maximum speed. During that time, Cole trained his Marines constantly. They studied physiology, learning where to aim for maximum damage. They practiced urban combat in the ship's simulation chambers. They prepared for the worst. On Prime, the ground forces had reached the capital city. Warlord, commander of the invasion, watched his soldiers drag civilians from their homes. Some were killed immediately. Others were sorted into groups for labor or other purposes. They did not fight back. They cowered and begged and submitted, just as prey animals always did. Felt nothing but contempt. These creatures were weak. They deserved to be conquered. He did not know that help was coming. He did not know that somewhere in the darkness between stars, human soldiers were sharpening their knives and checking their weapons. He did not know that the simple message, "Please help us," had been enough to send warriors racing across the galaxy. He would learn soon. The occupation of Prime was efficient and brutal. Warlord had conquered 11 worlds before this one, and he had learned that speed was everything. Within 3 days, his forces controlled all major cities. Within a week, they had established processing centers where civilians were sorted like grain. Walked through the capital city with his personal guard around him. The streets were filled with smoke from burning buildings. Bodies lay where they had fallen because no one had been allowed to move them. Survivors huddled in groups, their large eyes tracking every soldier with pure terror. "The mineral surveys are complete," his aide reported. "This world is even richer than we expected. The Dominion will be pleased." Made a satisfied sound deep in his throat. What of resistance? None worth mentioning. A few individuals tried to flee. They were caught and executed. The rest have submitted completely. This was always how it went. Prey species never fought. They ran or they surrendered or they died. It was the natural order of things. Had never encountered a species that behaved differently. He was about to learn that humans were not like other species. The Valor dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system 18 days after leaving Earth. Admiral Lucy Grant stood on the bridge and studied the tactical display. The fleet was clustered in orbit around Prime, 47 warships forming a defensive sphere. Getting past them would be nearly impossible. Options, she asked. Lieutenant Park, her tactical officer, was 26 years old and brilliant with numbers. He had run simulations of this battle 100 times during the journey. None of them ended well. We cannot win a straight fight, he said, but we might be able to create a distraction. Send the drone ships toward the far side of the planet. They will have to respond. While they are moving, we make a high-speed run toward the atmosphere and deploy our Marines. The Valor will take heavy damage, Grant said. Yes, but the Marines will reach the surface. Grant was silent for a moment. She thought about the 1,200 soldiers in the bays below her, young men and women who had volunteered to cross the galaxy and fight for strangers. They deserved a chance to complete their mission. Do it, she ordered. The drone ships launched first, racing toward the planet on a course designed to look like an attack run. The fleet responded exactly as Park had predicted, shifting position to intercept. That created a gap, narrow and temporary, between two of their largest warships. The Valor went through that gap at maximum speed. Weapons hammered the ship from both sides. Hull breaches opened on 3 decks. Fires broke out in the engine compartment. 200 crew members died in the first 30 seconds, but the Valor kept going, plunging into the atmosphere of Prime with her hull glowing red from friction. Deploy Marines, Grant shouted over the alarms. 30 drop pods launched from the belly of the ship, carrying 40 soldiers each. They scattered across the sky above the capital city, falling through smoke and fire toward the streets below. Sergeant Maya Torres felt the pod shaking around her as it descended. Through the small window she could see nothing but orange flames and black clouds. Her squad was packed tight beside her, 12 soldiers in full combat armor with weapons ready. None of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The pod hit the ground hard enough to rattle her teeth. The door blew off and Torres was moving before the dust settled, her rifle up and scanning for targets. They had landed in what looked like a residential district, surrounded by collapsed buildings and burning vehicles. Squad, form up on me, she ordered through her helmet radio. Watch your sectors. They moved through the smoke in a tight formation. Visibility was less than 20 meters. The air was thick with ash and the smell of burning plastic. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear weapons fire and screaming. Contact left, one of her soldiers shouted. Torres spun and saw shapes emerging from a ruined building. For a moment her finger tightened on the trigger. Then she realized these were not. They were 3 of them, their fur matted with blood and their eyes wide with terror. They screamed when they saw the armored humans. They fell to the ground and covered their heads, waiting to die. Torres lowered her weapon and removed her helmet. The air was foul, but she needed them to see her face. She crouched down and spoke slowly and clearly. We are not going to hurt you. We are here to help. Do you understand? They stared at her. They had never seen a human before. To them she must have looked like another predator, another monster come to add to their suffering. Help, Torres repeated. We came to help. Slowly, one of them lifted its head. It was an older female, her fur gray around the muzzle. She looked at Torres with an expression of complete confusion. Why, she asked in broken English, why would you help us? Torres did not have time to answer. Her radio crackled with reports from other squads. Patrols were converging on their position. The enemy had detected the landing and was responding. We need to move, she told them. Stay behind us, stay quiet, we will protect you. The firefight happened 2 blocks later. A patrol of 15 soldiers came around a corner and walked straight into Torres' squad. Both sides opened fire at the same time. They were fast. They moved with a fluid grace that came from millions of years of predator evolution. Their weapons were advanced, firing plasma bolts that could burn through standard body armor. 3 of Tor's soldiers went down in the first exchange. But humans had something they did not expect. They had rage. Tors charged forward into the enemy fire, her rifle blazing. She shot 2 soldiers at close range, then used her weapon as a club when the third one got too close. Her remaining soldiers followed her lead, pushing through the pain of their wounds to keep fighting. The battle lasted 43 seconds. When it ended, all 15 soldiers were dead. Tors had lost 3 of her own, with 4 more wounded. She stood over the bodies of her enemies and breathed hard. "Sergeant," one of her soldiers said quietly. The Tors turned. The 3 survivors were staring at her with something new in their eyes. Not fear, not confusion, something that looked almost like hope. "You fought," the old female said. "You fought for us." "Yes," Tors said simply. "That is what we do." Across the city, similar scenes were playing out. Human soldiers emerging from smoke and fire, engaging patrols, protecting civilians they had never met. Captain Daniel Cole established his command post in a bombed hospital and began receiving reports. 847 Marines had survived the landing. They were scattered across 12 square kilometers of urban terrain, outnumbered but they were on the ground, and they were fighting. Cole looked at the tactical map and started planning. They could not defeat the in open battle, but they did not need to defeat them. They only needed to buy time. Time for the civilians to escape. Time to show the galaxy what humans were made of. Warlord had never experienced confusion on a battlefield before. He had conquered 11 worlds and the pattern was always the same. His forces would land, crush any resistance within hours and begin the occupation. Prey species did not fight. They lacked the instinct for it. But these humans were different. His patrols kept disappearing. Squads of 15 or 20 soldiers would enter a district and never return. When he sent larger forces to investigate, they found only bodies. His warriors, torn apart by projectile weapons or killed in close combat. The humans did not hold territory. They did not defend positions. They struck from nowhere and vanished into the smoke before reinforcements could arrive. "They fight like animals," one of his officers reported. "When we wound them, they do not stop. They keep attacking until they cannot move." Studied the reports with growing unease. In 3 days of fighting, the humans had killed over 2,000 of his soldiers while losing perhaps 200 of their own. That ratio was unacceptable. More importantly, it was impossible. His warriors were the finest in the Dominion. They should have swept these primitives aside with ease. "Find their command post," he ordered. "Cut off the head and the body will die." But the humans had no single command post. They operated in small, independent units, coordinating through encrypted communications that his technicians could not crack. Every time he thought he had located their leader, the signal moved somewhere else. Deep in the ruins of the capital, High Coordinator huddled in a basement with 30 other survivors. They had been trapped here for 2 days, too afraid to move. Patrols passed overhead regularly, and any attempt to flee would mean death. Then the wall exploded inward. Screamed and covered her face, expecting soldiers to pour through the breach. Instead, she saw 4 humans in dusty armor, their weapons raised and ready. Their leader was a young male with a calm face and steady eyes. "High Coordinator," he asked. She could not speak, she could only nod. "I am Corporal Ben. We are here to extract you. Please come with us." And his recon team led the survivors through a maze of tunnels and ruined buildings. They moved at night, using sensors to avoid patrols. When avoidance was impossible, the humans engaged with brutal efficiency, killing the enemy before they could raise an alarm. During a rest stop in an abandoned warehouse, found herself sitting next to. The young human was cleaning his weapon, his movements automatic and precise. She had so many questions, but one kept rising to the surface. "Why did you come?" she asked. Looked at her. "We received your distress signal." "But why did you respond? We are nothing to you. We have never helped Earth. We have never even spoken to your government before now." was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be thinking about the question seriously, which surprised her. She had expected some kind of political answer about alliances or strategy. "I do not know," he finally said. "The message said you were dying. It said please. I guess that was enough." Did not understand. In galactic politics, nothing happened without calculated benefit. Species helped each other only when there was something to gain. The idea that humans would cross the galaxy simply because someone asked nicely was absurd. Yet here they were. On the other side of the city, Captain Daniel Cole was planning his most ambitious operation yet. They had established their main supply depot in a sports stadium near the city center. All their fuel, ammunition, and food passed through that location. Destroying it would cripple their entire operation. 3 platoons, Cole explained to his officers. We go in through the underground maintenance tunnels, plant charges on the fuel storage, get out before they know we were there. Sergeant Maya Torres would lead the assault team. Private, the youngest soldier in the unit at just 19 years old, volunteered for the demolition detail. She had a talent for explosives and a steady hand that never shook no matter how bad things got. The operation began at midnight. 300 soldiers moved through the darkness, crawling through tunnels filled with sewage and debris. The smell was terrible, but no one complained. They had a job to do. They reached the stadium and found it heavily guarded. Soldiers patrolled every entrance. Automated weapons covered the approaches. It should have been impossible to penetrate. Torres found a way. There was a drainage pipe that ran under the eastern wall, too small for it to fit through but just big enough for a human. Went first, crawling on her belly through 30 meters of filthy water. Torres and 6 others followed. They emerged inside the stadium and found themselves surrounded by mountains of supplies. Fuel cells stacked 10 meters high. Ammunition crates by the thousands. Enough food to feed an army for months. "Plant the charges," Torres whispered. 30 seconds each position, then we go. Moved like a ghost, placing explosive devices at key structural points. She was halfway through her task when the alarm sounded. Someone had spotted them. Soldiers came from everywhere at once. Torres and her team opened fire, creating a wall of bullets between and the enemy. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, but they did not retreat. They could not retreat, not until the charges were set. Took a plasma bolt to her left side. She fell, got up, and kept moving. Another bolt hit her leg. She fell again, crawled to the final position, and pressed the detonator into place. "It is done," she screamed into her radio. "Everyone out," Torres ordered. They ran. Behind them, the stadium turned into a pillar of fire. The explosion was visible from orbit. Fuel cells cooked off in chains, sending secondary blasts through the entire complex. When the flames finally died, there was nothing left but a smoking crater. Crawled 300 meters back to friendly lines before collapsing from blood loss. The medics worked on her for 2 hours. She survived, barely, and would spend the next 6 months learning to walk again. The destruction of the supply depot changed everything. Vehicles began running out of fuel within days. Ammunition had to be rationed. Soldiers who had been confident of victory started looking over their shoulders, wondering where the next attack would come from. Warlord received the reports with cold fury. He had lost 2,000 more soldiers in the stadium attack, plus supplies that could not be replaced. These humans were more than a nuisance. They were a threat. "Bring down the reserves," he ordered. "All of them. I want every human on this planet dead." His aide hesitated. "Warlord, that will leave our ships vulnerable." "I do not care. We end this now." 20,000 fresh soldiers began descending from orbit. Their landing ships darkened the sky over the capital city, watched from his command post, and smiled for the first time in days. Let the humans fight, he thought. Let them rage and struggle. In the end, numbers would decide, and the numbers were on his side. But deep in the ruins, Captain Cole was also smiling. The reserves were landing. That meant the enemy fleet was weaker. And somewhere out there, Admiral Grant was watching and waiting for her moment to strike. The real battle was just beginning. The reinforcements hit the ground like a hammer. 20,000 fresh soldiers poured into the city, supported by armored vehicles and air cover. They moved through the streets in massive formations, clearing block after block with overwhelming force. Captain Daniel Cole watched the enemy advance on his tactical display and made a decision that would cost many lives. "All units fall back to the spaceport," he ordered. "Fighting retreat. Buy as much time as possible." The spaceport was 6 kilometers away, located on a plateau outside the city proper. It was the only location large enough to land evacuation ships. If they could hold it, there was a chance to get the surviving civilians off the planet. If they lost it, everyone would die. Sergeant Maya Torres received the order and gathered what remained of her squad. She had started with 40 soldiers. Now she had 14. The others were dead or wounded too badly to fight. The survivors looked at her with tired eyes, but no one complained. No one suggested surrender. That was not something humans did. "We are the rear guard," Torres told them. "Everyone else goes ahead. We stay and slow them down." They took position at a bridge that crossed a deep canal. It was the only route to the spaceport for thousands of civilians who were still moving through the city. Families with children, elderly individuals who could barely walk, wounded soldiers being carried on stretchers. They streamed past Tor's position in an endless flow of fear and exhaustion. They arrived 30 minutes later. They came in a column of armored vehicles, supported by infantry on both flanks. Their commander was experienced and cautious, advancing slowly to avoid ambushes. But there was no ambush this time, just 14 humans standing on a bridge with their weapons ready. Torres opened fire at maximum range. Her soldiers followed her lead, pouring bullets into the advancing column. The returned fire with plasma weapons that turned concrete into molten slag. Vehicles exploded. Bodies fell on both sides. "Hold position," Torres shouted. "Nobody moves until I say so." She took a plasma bolt to her shoulder. The impact spun her around and dropped her to one knee. She got up and kept firing. One of her soldiers went down with a shot to the chest. Another lost an arm and tied off the wound with his belt, then picked up his rifle with his remaining hand and kept fighting. They pushed forward with overwhelming numbers. For everyone that fell, 3 more took their place. They reached the bridge and tried to cross. Torres threw grenades until she ran out, then fixed her bayonet and met them hand to hand. The fighting lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of blood and fire and screaming. Torres was wounded 3 times more but refused evacuation each time. She knew that if she left, her soldiers would follow, and if her soldiers left, the bridge would fall. And if the bridge fell, thousands of civilians would die. So she stayed. In orbit, Admiral Lucy Grant watched the battle unfold through sensor data and felt something twist in her chest. Her Marines were dying down there, buying time with their blood. The Valor was too damaged to help, barely able to maintain orbit, but the fleet had been weakened by the troop deployment. "Lieutenant Park," she said quietly, "what are our chances if we attack now?" Park ran the numbers in his head. The Valor was operating at 30% capacity. Her weapons were damaged. Her shields were failing. Against even the weakened fleet, she would last perhaps 10 minutes. "Not good," he admitted. "But if we draw their fire, the evacuation ships might be able to reach the surface." Grant nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come. Every commander who led soldiers into battle knew that someday they might have to sacrifice themselves for the mission. "All non-essential personnel will evacuate to the escape pods," she ordered. "Helm will set a collision course with the largest vessel. I will remain on the bridge." Park looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down at his console and began entering commands. "What are you doing?" Grant asked. "Staying," he said simply. "Someone needs to handle targeting." They shared a look that said everything words could not express. Then they turned back to their work. The Valor began its final attack run. On the surface, High Coordinator had reached the spaceport with Corporal and his team. She stood near the landing pads and watched human soldiers stream past her, carrying wounded comrades and civilians alike. The smoke from the city rose behind them like a dark curtain. She saw things that would stay with her forever. A human medic named Corporal Diana Santos stopped in the middle of an open street to treat a wounded elder. Plasma bolts struck the ground around her, but she did not move until her patient was stabilized. When asked why she would risk her life like that, Santos looked at her with genuine confusion. "Because she needed help," Santos said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Saw soldiers carrying children on their backs, using their own bodies as shields against enemy fire. She saw wounded humans refuse evacuation so that civilians could take their places on the transport ships. She saw a young private with both legs shattered drag himself behind a barricade and keep firing until he ran out of ammunition. These humans were insane. They had to be. No rational species would sacrifice so much for strangers. No logical mind would trade its life for people it had never met. Yet here they were, dying by the hundreds to save people who had always looked down on them as primitive barbarians. The perimeter was collapsing. Forces had broken through in 3 places. Captain Cole, wounded in the chest from leading a counterattack, had transferred command to Tors and was being carried toward the evacuation ships against his will. 2 hours, he gasped to the soldiers carrying him. "Hold for 2 hours and the ships can launch." Tors received the message and looked at her remaining soldiers. 7 people, 7 humans against 20,000. "You heard the captain," she said. "We hold." They formed a line around the last evacuation zone, where 3 transport ships were loading with civilians. Behind them, 40,000 waited for their chance to escape. In front of them, the entire army was advancing. Tors checked her ammunition. She had 2 magazines left. Around her, soldiers were scavenging weapons from the dead and sharing their last rounds with each other. Nobody spoke about survival. Nobody made plans for after the battle. There was only the next minute, the next shot, the next breath. They came like a wave of scales and teeth and plasma fire. Tors raised her rifle and began shooting. Beside her, the last defenders of the spaceport did the same. In orbit, the Valor crashed into a battlecruiser at full speed. The explosion lit up the sky. On the ground, humans and killed each other in the smoke and fire, while evacuation ships began to lift off behind them. The longest 2 hours in history had begun. The final battle at the spaceport was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 700 human soldiers faced 20,000 warriors in a shrinking perimeter that grew smaller with every passing minute. The ground was covered with bodies from both sides. The air was so thick with smoke and ash that visibility dropped to less than 10 meters. Sergeant Maya Tors stood at the center of the line, her armor cracked and her face streaked with blood that was both hers and not hers. She had stopped counting her wounds hours ago. She had stopped thinking about survival even earlier. There was only the mission now. Protect the civilians. Hold the line. Give them time to escape. Behind her, the evacuation ships were loading in organized chaos. Families rushed up the ramps while human soldiers carried those too weak to walk. Children cried for parents who would never answer. The wounded were strapped into any available space. Every ship was filled far beyond safe capacity, but no one cared about safety anymore. Warlord pushed through his own lines to reach the front. He wanted to see these humans for himself. He wanted to understand what made them fight like this. 11 worlds he had conquered, and never, not once, had he encountered resistance like this. He found what he was looking for near the northern perimeter. A group of 7 humans were holding a position around a cluster of children who had been separated from their parents. The humans formed a circle with their bodies, facing outward, weapons raised. They were surrounded by soldiers who vastly outnumbered them. Tors was among them. Ordered his soldiers to halt. He wanted to speak to this human leader, this small female who had caused him so much trouble. He stepped forward until only 10 meters separated them. "You cannot win," he said in accented English. His translators had been working overtime to learn human languages. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your soldiers are dying. Why do you continue to fight?" Tors did not lower her weapon. Her hands were steady despite everything. "Because these children need protection," she said. "They are not your children. They are not even your species. What do you gain by dying for them?" Tors seemed to consider the question. Around her, her soldiers maintained their positions, ready to fire at any moment. Behind her, the children huddled together, too terrified to make a sound. "We do not need to gain anything," Tors finally said. "We do not do what is right because it benefits us. We do it because it is right." Did not understand. He could not understand. His entire worldview was built on power and dominance and the natural order of predator and prey. The idea that someone would sacrifice themselves for strangers without any benefit was simply beyond his comprehension. "You are insane," he said. "Maybe," Tors agreed, "but we are still standing." The battle resumed. Tors and her soldiers fought with everything they had left. Ammunition ran out and they switched to knives. Knives broke and they used their fists. One by one they fell, but not one of them retreated. Not one of them tried to surrender. Above the spaceport, the first evacuation ships broke through the atmosphere and reached orbit. The fleet, crippled by the sacrifice of the Valor and her crew, could not stop them. More ships followed, then more. 40,000 civilians escaped the planet in those desperate hours while human soldiers died to give them time. Admiral Grant did not survive the battle. She went down with her ship, her last act sending targeting data to the evacuation fleet so they could avoid the remaining vessels. Lieutenant Park died beside her, his hand still on his console. Captain Cole survived his wounds and was evacuated against his wishes. He spent the journey to safety watching through a viewport as the planet grew smaller behind him, knowing that his soldiers were still fighting and dying down there. Sergeant Tors was shot 7 times during the final assault. She killed 11 more soldiers before she finally collapsed. The children she had been protecting were carried to safety by the last human soldiers still standing. When the evacuation was complete, they held the spaceport, but the humans had achieved their mission. 42,000 civilians had escaped. The cost was high. Nearly 300 human soldiers dead, twice that many wounded. The Valor and her crew lost. Warlord stood in the ruins and looked at the human bodies around him. He had won the battle, but it did not feel like victory. His forces had been mauled. His supplies were gone. His fleet was damaged. And for what? An agricultural world that would take years to make productive again. He ordered the withdrawal 3 days later. The Dominion abandoned Prime and retreated to their own territory. The cost of occupation was simply too high. 6 months passed. They rebuilt their capital city with help from Earth. Construction crews worked alongside alien engineers. Trade agreements were signed. A formal alliance was announced. For the first time in galactic history, humans were seen not as violent primitives but as potential partners. High Coordinator traveled to Prime for the dedication of a memorial. It was a simple stone wall with names carved into it. 287 names. Every human who had died defending her world. She stood before a crowd of thousands, and human alike, and spoke about what she had witnessed during the battle. When we sent our distress call, we did not know what would answer. We had heard stories about humans, that they were violent, that they were aggressive, that they could not be trusted. We believed those stories. She paused and looked at the wall of names. We were wrong. What came to us from Earth was not violence. It was courage. It was sacrifice. It was a willingness to die for people they had never met. When we asked for help, they did not ask what they would gain. They simply came. In the crowd, Sergeant Maya Tor stood in civilian clothes. She had been discharged from the military 6 months ago due to her injuries. She walked with a limp now and her left arm did not work quite right. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. A small figure approached her through the crowd. It was a child, young and nervous, clutching something in their four-fingered hands. Tors recognized her immediately, one of the children she had protected during the final battle. The child held up a drawing. It showed a figure in armor standing in front of smaller figures, protecting them from dark shapes. The armored figure had a human face. "Thank you," the child said in careful English, "for saving us." Tors knelt down so she was at the child's level. She had never been good with words. She had spent her whole life expressing herself through action rather than speech. But now, looking at this small alien child who was alive because of what she and her soldiers had done, she found that words came easily. "You are welcome," she said. The child took her hand. Tors smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since landing on this world all those months ago. Finished her speech and the crowd began to disperse. Humans and mingled together, talking and laughing and sharing food. It was a small moment of peace after so much pain. But across the galaxy, other species were watching. They saw what humans had done on Prime. They saw that these violent primitives from a small planet on the edge of known space were capable of something none of them had expected. Compassion, sacrifice, the willingness to fight and die for strangers. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. From the smoke of battle, a new alliance had been born, and it had started with a simple message: "We are dying, please help us." The humans had answered.